This
Derek Lumsden,
conference will now be recorded.
and hopefully everybody's here for crisis proofing your downtown. Otherwise, you may have to log out and go somewhere else. But I wanted to take a moment today to let you know a little bit about who I am. I am Derek Lumsden with Pulse Productions Consulting. My background is a mix of things, but over the last decade, I've been in Main Street, economic development, chamber of commerce, a lot of those type of nonprofit organizations that help with communities and downtowns or revitalization. So one of the things I've worked on over my career is it seems like anytime you're in a downtown, there's always some sort of crisis either happening or ready to happen. And I decided that it was time to talk about different ways that the different entities that play major roles can help on crisis proofing your downtown. Now, it's not an exhaustive list of things and everything won't work for everybody, but getting some ideas of how you think through different problems and giving you some examples of what have happened can really be helpful. So while a lot of this has its basis or some of the examples in terms of fighting COVID, it can happen for any of the number of different crises that we have seen or are planning to see this year. So COVID, economic recession, we had some of the massive storms like the hurricane in Louisiana, the land hurricane in Iowa, murder hornets, whatever it is. There's all kinds of things out there that can cause a crisis in your community, and especially your downtowns where the bulk of your action and business are. So today we're going to give some different ideas on how to help crisis proof your downtown, looking through three major entities: the city, the businesses, and the nonprofits such as the Main Streets and downtown organizations. And there's other actors involved, but those are probably the main three that will help drive success or can contribute to failure in your downtown. And we'll give some good rules of thumb and some life examples of how different communities are coping with different situations. So that's sort of what we're getting into today. And we will move now to, if it will work, to the PowerPoint. There we go. So where were we? It's hard to think that just 6 months ago, life was relatively normal, that we were all planning to go to conferences, we were looking at spring breaks, we were just coming out of a pretty mild winter for the most part, and then we hear about this disease called COVID, and that's drastically changed how we do business. And so a lot of people are thinking now that, what are we going to end up doing? We need to be talking about resilience and how do we get our communities back. There are two definitions for the word resilience. Most people go with the first definition, and that's the power or ability to return to the original form after being bent or stretched. It gives this idea that, I'm a tree I can bend. When the wind blows and it wears me down, I pop back up once the wind stops and I feel better. There may be a little bit of haggardness still, but I'm just the same as I've always been. And to me, that sort of misses the mark and underlying factors of what we're dealing with and how all of these different crises stack up in our communities. So I tend to go with the secondary definition of resilience, and that's the ability to recover readily from adversity. Now, I think we can all agree that these are some adverse times and that's how they're affecting everybody. But how we recover is going to be done differently than just going back to normal. We don't get a blank slate. We don't start over. It's not a lost episode or a deleted scene. Oh, 2020 was a horrible year. Let's just cut it out of our memory. It's going to impact who we are and what we do for the next several years to come. So our goal should be recovering from adversity, not just focusing on going back to normal, because the likelihood of that happening is probably unrealistic. So I try to talk about it more in terms of a paradigm shift. So in 2019, we were up here. We were at this level where a lot of things were good. We were focusing on different things. We were getting things accomplished. And then in 2020, we started having these multi-level, multi-layered crises hit us. And so we're reacting. Now, in a crisis, you're almost always reacting because they're hard to plan for. So we're doing that, whether it's through mask mandates, virtual schools, trying to flood the market with a whole bunch of cheap money for people to buy and loan and whatnot. All those things shift the paradigm of who we are and what we're doing. Even the Federal Reserve has talked about how a good low level of inflation may not be what they need to search for the next few years to get our economy back in place. So we're really in a time of transition. And I tell people that crises really affect people in a time of transition. They cause a transition period from one normal to a new normal. So that's what we're in the middle of now. We're still dealing with some of the crises on a daily basis and new ones are popping up. But this is our time of transition. And a lot of people said, it'll be 3 months, 6 months, and we'll be back to normal. I'm a lot more maybe pessimistic than that, but times of transition rarely happen in that small of an impact state. We're probably looking anywhere from 2 to 5 years before we stabilize at a new normal, what our new normal will be from that point on. until we get these crises handled and we start to come out of that sort of abyss of them, we're going to be still in that transition period. So probably for the next 2 to 5 years, you can count on things not going back to a normal we recognize and probably not as stabilizing at a point yet. So when people talk about the new normal, we need to stop that conversation. It does a couple of different things that are detrimental to us. One, it assumes that this is going to be normal for the rest of our lives. Let's hope we're not watching hundreds of thousands of people die every year because we can't wear masks or wash hands or whatever it is. So this is not our new normal. This is our crisis period. This is our transition period to get us to a place that 5 years from now, we remember these times and we remember how to take precautions to prevent such a mass outbreak or anything like that again. So this is not a new normal. It works against us because people inherently turn off common sense and say, let's get back to normal, or this is our new normal now, let's live like this. The truth is a little bit underlying that we have to go through this time to get to what our stabilization point will be in the future. One of the good things that come out of a paradigm shift or a time of transition like this is that we have a good neighbor intention. A lot of people are stepping up to help, whether it's donating blood to victims in Louisiana or helping by coming to Iowa and cutting down trees from the land hurricane or wherever it might be. People are stepping up and saying, hey, let's help each other. Let's get through this. It's hard on everybody. Everybody's going through the same thing, which is kind of unique for a crisis. It's a worldwide crisis, and we haven't really seen one of those, or most of us on this call haven't seen one of those. So it's interesting to see how people step up in times of adversity, and that's one of the ways we'll readily recover. And we'll get to that in a little bit about how we draw in some of those other partners. And then it also helps us thinking about future crisis preparation. I know when I was younger, I didn't think about in terms of, oh, what happened if several crises hit at once? I didn't think about an economic recession, something like a plague. I didn't think about some of the social unrest we're seeing at the different places around the country, some of the election concerns that are coming in. All those different things playing out, you don't really think about until they happen. So now that we've seen them, we're in a better position to say, let's prepare for future crises. And that's part of what this talks about today and what I want to get on to. One of my favorite quotes that describes a lot of things in life is from Grace Hopper. She was a scientist, a woman scientist that most women back in her time weren't considered to be intelligent enough to do some of the work she did. And so one of the quotes that I attribute to her that I always try to break out and use when people talk about let's go back to normal is the most dangerous phrase in the language is we've always done it this way. And I'm sure you've been in communities that said, oh, we've done it this way for 50 years or longer, and why fix what's not broken? And that's a dangerous phrase because it makes us complacent. It doesn't help us prepare because we're going on in the same path. It's automatic, it's hypnotic. This is what we do, this is how we do it. But we need to break that paradigm. And that's why crises can be good for us because it gets us out of those different bubbles. So today, like I said, we're going to break it down into 3 different functions. We're going to have the city functions, we're going to have the business functions, and we're going to have the Main Street or downtown organization functions. And each are sort of going to have their overarching rules of thumb, but I try to give examples at each level to talk about things that people can do or ways people can think to help bring them to a better reality of how to prepare for crisis and how to prepare in advance of a crisis. So one of the things that a city can do, a city government especially that works best for them, is being proactive. They know their community best. You can't wait for the state legislature. You can't wait necessarily for the county. You can't wait for the federal government to necessarily step in. In this case, all of those things happen and continue to happen in different ways, but you know your community best. Act. Don't wait for people to come and complain that, hey, we just had this land hurricane come through. What are we going to do about it? You see something happen, do something about it. Also, be transparent. Cities are generally pretty good at this because they're held to a higher standard. They have to put out their agendas. They have to put out their packets. They have to have their minutes recorded. And a lot of them do live television or video of their meetings. But that doesn't always get to the why of something. They might tell you what they do, but you might miss some of the underlying why things should happen. And transparency is going to be huge because people don't know how to react to this crisis. If someone is reacting, they need to know what's happening and why. And then finally, innovation. Now is the time to be creative. If you always heard people say, well, I don't know if we should take that chance or not, it's pretty dangerous. That could be something that really bites us in the ass. Yeah, general times, maybe you can't be as innovative as you'd like to be. But now the gloves are off. The rules have changed. We're watching unprecedented a number of people die from that. We're watching people be unemployed at monstrous and historical rates. There are times that now is the time to be creative. If you were ever thinking, let's throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, now is the time. There's nothing holding you back from being innovative or creative. Try something. If it doesn't work, scratch it off and go to something else. You rarely have the freedom to be this creative, but with all these different plates in the air, who's going to notice one more plate going up? If it drops, fine. Try again, but be innovative. Don't be reactive. Try being proactive for a change. So Covington, Kentucky is one of the towns I want to talk about. It's a GAMSA Award winner from the National Main Street Center. Some of you may have been there a few years ago when they won their award. But in March, when things started shutting down, Kentucky was one of those states that had some high cases early on. They came up with the Emergency Rent and Mortgage Business Assistance Program. And it's impressive because most states and cities started shutting down around March 15th, March 16th. They came out with this program less than 2 weeks later. And it offers financial assistance in the form of reimbursement for half of their rent or mortgage payment, or up to $500 per month, whichever's less. And so they get the eligibility assistance for up to 4 months or until they hit the $2,000 mark. And they were starting to be eligible in April of 2020. The city set aside $200,000 for this program. Granted, a lot of cities may not be as large as Covington, Kentucky, but even if you say set up $70,000 or whatever you could out of your general funds in the city, or maybe out of water, sewer, or some fund where you have access to use those funds in this way, you can help keep businesses open. Economic development is considered an essential corporate purpose of any city, so they have the ability to use funds a little more freely than they might if they were doing something else. So this was a fantastic approach on their part, and they threw it together really quickly. You had to have an application. It didn't mean you were going to get funded. You could only go up to the $2,000 or 4 months, depending on how much your rent would be. And you had to pay it first, and it was a reimbursable grant. It was a reimbursable process. So you had to pay, show proof of payment, and then you got half of it back. It was the city's way of trying to keep businesses open. So that was in April. That started April 1st of 2020. Jump ahead to September. This is where they are now. 36 businesses took advantage of the program so far to approximately $70,000. They all had to apply, and they have to sign an agreement saying this is what they would do. They would pay first, turn in the receipt, then get the reimbursable amount. And then, so I mean, out of $200,000, they still have a long way to go. This program's ongoing. They haven't turned anyone away. All the businesses are still taking advantage of it. Some are coming on, some are going off, sort of depending on the way the state's opening. But that's allowing them to help keep businesses open. 36 businesses in this community. Imagine if your downtown lost 36 businesses, or even a share of that, what that could do to your downtown. One of the interesting things, I was talking to the city administrator, is that most businesses own their buildings free and clear. So they didn't have a mortgage, they didn't have rent. How do you help them? What they did is they set aside a one-time flat grant of the $2,000 to help them with other things. It can be used for whatever. And they had to sign the same agreement, and they had to apply. They've had 4 businesses take advantage of that. And the nice thing about this program, it didn't matter if you'd done PPP, it didn't matter if you'd done EIDL, it didn't matter on any of those other programs that you might have taken advantage of, you could still take advantage of this. So it gave those business and building owners a little bit more security in how they were going to go forward through this pandemic. And the fact that there's still money in it, it's still going, the city's talking about extending those 36 businesses beyond the 4 months if they need it for maybe another 2 months. And so the program's still operating and taking new applications as needed. Now, it doesn't have to be as extravagant as what Covington did, but this is a proactive and innovative approach that the city of Covington, Kentucky took that other towns could model. Main Street's the home of rip off and duplicate. You all can easily do something very similar. If you have questions on it, there's more information on the program on Kentucky's website. You go to covingtonkentucky.gov, you scroll to the bottom, find their COVID-19 link, click on it, and then there's a business resources link, and then the emergency rent subsidy program. So the link takes you to a couple of news articles and executive orders, and the application should be on that page as well. If somebody goes and they can't find it, let me know. I have the application that I can send to New Mexico Main Street so you all can get a copy of it and see what they do. Because there's no use reinventing the wheel for something as simple as this. It may sound daunting, but they put it up in 2 weeks, and they've had 40 businesses take part in some form or fashion. That is keeping businesses open. When I talked to them, they said they hadn't had a business close yet, which means the ones that didn't take advantage are still essential enough and vital enough that they can stay open on their own. Which, since we don't know what this is going to look like, and we're still in phase one of just the COVID situation, which will impact our economic finances down the road, this is a fantastic program that allows a city to step in and help, because they know the local community best, but they also took a chance on being creative and innovative. So keeping that in mind, Covington is one of my favorite stories out of the pandemic, especially in ways that you can help your local business community. A lot of cities step back and say, hey, it's not our job, it's the downtown association's job, it's economic development, it's the business's job to keep customers coming in and stuff. But here, Covington realized these were unique circumstances, unique times, and they stepped up with a unique solution. So some of the other ways we talk about city functions and how they can be proactive, and a lot of people did this. Cities were very on the ball with closures. They said, you know what, we can't really rely on the county or the state, and sometimes even the city itself to determine, do we need a mask mandate? Do we need to shut down everything? Do we need to close events? What do we do? So the city did the proactive measures. They closed all their facilities. They closed down event centers. They closed down the parks. They closed down City Hall. They closed down the libraries. And they closed all these down to try to limit people being out and about. And so when they closed them and they moved a lot of stuff online, like city council meetings, if they hadn't been on Zoom or whatnot before, now people were able to do so. And that's one of those things, since they were proactive early on, now as things have started opening up, cities have continued to keep their meetings on Zoom, trying to keep minimal access to their facilities, because they know that a public space is one where the virus especially can run a little more rampant. So they were proactive in those ways, and it paid early dividends, because a lot of city help and a lot of city staff didn't get sick, which would have caused problems down the road in getting city functions taken care of. And the other thing, on transparency, a lot of people put out information, they posted it, they did everything they could on things like events. They did cancellations, rescheduling. They tried to help by moving some of them virtual. They encouraged people to do things like go online and buy things and come to the store and do remote pickup. Drop it at, park outside, call inside, they'll come out and do it. They are allowed for that type of, loitering is the wrong word, but they allowed for that type of loitering outside establishments, where usually there's some pretty strict regulations about that in a commercial district in a downtown. So they were very transparent about what was allowed when and how they would go about it. Whether things were canceled, rescheduled, or moved virtual, they were very clear about it. Cities are good at pushing out information when they need to. So in this case, it was just an essential function they did, but they did it much better than some other people who weren't prepared for it. Cities tend to be a little more prepared for things like this, but it's always good to keep in mind, the more information you share, the what and the why, you're going to be able to get more people to follow that lead. And then finally, the innovation one. So a lot of them are revisiting zoning. They're taking away parking minimums. They're also taking away the ability to park outside of a business for 10, 15, 20 minutes as you wait on a food order. They're putting up special signs that say, hey, takeout only, or to-go orders picked up here. Just like a parking lot would have for an Applebee's or an Olive Garden or a larger chain, now downtown restaurants and businesses can do that as well. And that's because the cities have sort of stepped back from their own zoning enforcement to say, these are different times, we need different ideas. So let's make it as easy as possible for people to shop and be downtown while still being safe. And then they do things like expand outdoor options. I know a lot of towns went to making parklets, where you put them out into the parking lots or into the parking on the street, where you create seating areas. That allowed people to socially distance. It allowed people to still be outside, which a lot of the health experts say was still needed. And it allowed some minimized socializing. So it did all those things that we needed our downtowns to be successful, but the city made sure that there were other options. It wasn't just, well, if you can't socially distance inside your business, too bad. They gave them other options. They were innovative in such a way that they could do it. And a lot of these innovations, as you'll see, will probably continue forward. A lot of downtown businesses or restaurants might go to the city together and say, these one or two to-go parking spots were lifesavers. Can we keep them? Or expanding outdoor options, some of that downtown seating probably isn't going to go away. It might be moved, it might be restructured, but the fact that it helped save local economies means it'll probably be there to stay, and people enjoy it. So if people enjoy it and it's helping, why not keep it? So those are sort of how some of the city functions and city ideas But that proactive, transparent, and innovation, those three things the city needs to remember. If they can focus on ways to enact those types of ideas, they're going to be more successful in combating any crisis, whether it's something they plan for, like a hurricane where you have some notice, to something you don't, like the sudden explosion of COVID cases in a local community. So as long as the city is willing to be an engaged partner, they can take on a lot of that effort. The next one I would talk about are business functions. And this one's a little longer because businesses are unique and varied, and there's a lot of different options. But some of the rules of thumb that I want to keep in mind on the business side of it is, one, we need to get some 21st century updates and conversions to a variety of outlets and hours, and we'll talk about that. Doing some experimentation as a business. Again, just like a city, there's no reason not to experiment at this point in time. What have you got to lose? You're already losing business more than likely. Why not try something new and see what it does? And then finally, again, transparency, the what and the why. You need to make sure that people understand what's going on and why your business specifically might be doing something. It may be something simple like you have to wear a mask and we have a city mask mandate. It may be something else. So it's important to make sure that you're being as transparent as possible too, if nothing else, just to reinforce the local message. So one of the ones I want to talk about is a Washington, D.C. bookstore. And bookstores were hard hit because early on they had to close down. So Kyle Burke said that Capitol Hill's books, they were looking for a way to support their employees. And they weren't for sure what to do during the coronavirus lockdown. They had to think of ways to keep people working, but still be aware of the coronavirus restrictions. So what they did is they offered online appointments. The customer used gloves and hand sanitizer. They could come to the store for up to an hour, and they had all 3 floors and thousands of volumes to themselves. If anyone's an avid reader like I am, the idea of being able to go into a giant bookstore and have the run of the place makes it feel like your own little personal library. And that really clicked with some people. They wanted to get out, but they wanted to be safe. They wanted to do something fun and not just have it be an errand of necessity. The Washington books really filled that void. And this was early on. This was late March, early April, before a lot of people knew just how long this would drag out and impact their social lives and their overall well-being mentally. The Washington, D.C. was ahead of it. Capitol Hill Books did this for months. And they said over time that the employees got to have fun with it, and so did the customers. And one of the things they did was recommend books and whatnot around COVID or isolation. So they had a quarantine collection that contained Chairman Mao's 4-minute physical plan to the Count of Monte Cristo, where they had a lot of people that were quarantined or isolated for some reason, and they set up book displays around it. That not only gives people a chance to read something they might not have read, but it pokes a little fun at the situation, takes some levity into it, which can be important. It's a lot more fun to laugh than it is to cry, but if you're giving people something fun to do and a way to interact, it helps combat some of the other maybe mental health, depression, and whatnot that may have been part of their lifestyle at that point. So this was a fun, cheap, and easy way that he can keep people working, still keep his store open, and still have people going out and being able to socialize and do some of those extracurricular activities. So we'll jump to Albuquerque, New Mexico now. Albuquerque, New Mexico has a couple of things that were impacted by the coronavirus. And I'm sure most of you have heard these, but I thought they were great stories to include. One of them being Francisco Rodriguez. He's owner of Casa de Piñata, and he makes piñatas. And he says, that this year was down. People weren't having parties. Things were being canceled. What does he do? He's the slowest he's been in 20 years. And so what did he do? He started making coronavirus piñatas. They look just like the little coronavirus germs that they show on TV when they announce any segment. And he started selling those. And it's been one of his best years. He's selling a ton of them. People are buying them from all over the place because it's unique. It's something different. And who wouldn't like to take a bat to a coronavirus particle just to take out some frustration? It was a great way. It was an innovative way to try something new, but then step out and say, hey, I had to do this because I was losing all this money. He was very clear, very transparent about it. I thought, why not take advantage of the situation? And so he said, I put these together. Now they're selling like crazy. So those are the types of things that every business owner should be free to do. Look at your situation. Tell people honestly, hey, I'm not doing so well. I need to try something new. Help me with it. He tried something new. Everybody helped him with it, and he's doing better now. Is it a long-term solution? Probably not, but it gives him a way to weather the pandemic that other people may not have thought of. The other one is Albuquerque tents, and they're in the same situation. The party tents are now starting to pop outside of restaurants because you have that outdoor seating. So the city and the businesses work together on allowing such things. Albuquerque tents can come in and say, hey, we can set up the tents. People can set these up. You can get some shade from the sun while you're outside dining. And it gives them some business because weddings and funerals and parties and all that stuff had been canceled. It gives them another lease on life. So they took advantage of a situation when people came to them and said, hey, why don't we pivot and get into a different situation? So they were innovative. They were creative about it, but they were also transparent too, saying that we just don't know what we're going to be able to do or how we're going to survive unless we try a different tactic. So it's very important, especially if there's any business owners listening, if not for the Main Street organization to talk to those businesses, figure out if there's a way for them to be creative. Because there almost always is, but some people may not have that mindset. Try to help them. Give them examples of something like this to see what they might be able to do that can be creative in their line of work to maybe spur some of that business back. So back to the 21st century updates and conversions, variety of outlets and hours. Most people work their set hours, and then the pandemic happened or economic recession hit or people started working from home, and it changed the dynamic of how people went to work and how they spent money. So people needed to be online, and they worked. People needed to have less restrictive hours, and a lot of people didn't. So they had to change what they were doing in order to make it work. And when I think of 21st century updates, I always splash back to Back to the Future 2, where Doc Brown went into the future and got a hover conversion. And when he came back, Marty asked him, well, why'd you do that? Well, it's all flying cars, or it was supposed to be in the year 2015. But if he hadn't had that, he would have been driving on the ground. He would have been completely archaic to everything happening. So when he went to the future, he got a hover conversion, and now he fit in, and he could run with the economy and everything the way it was. And that's really hard for businesses, especially if they've been in business 20, 30, 40 years, to think about. And that's why the push was so strong. For years, Main Street directors have had that fight. Why don't you go online? Have a website, have a way to purchase online, all these things, get a Facebook account, do social media. I'm begging you. And you went until you were blue in the face, and it didn't work. The pandemic changed a lot of that and kickstarted a lot of people into the 21st century. And I'm sure you got a lot more updates. Hey, I need to know how to use Facebook or Twitter or how to do websites. And a lot of those businesses probably saw their inventory business tick up where some of the others shut down. But we need to keep always pushing that. You pushed and pushed for years, and now a lot of them are starting to do it. It's one of the things you got to take in mind. And I'm no better. I've done polished productions for 15, 20 years off and on, and I didn't even put up my website until this year. I went a lot on word of mouth and people I knew, and just the way that I went about things, I thought, do I really need a website? And then even before things started changing in 2020, I decided, you know what, if I'm going to preach some of this, I need to be showing it. So I started my website this year as well, and it's shown some help. I've gotten a lot of good views on it, a lot of good comments, and it helps kickstart. It may not be the thing that saves the business, and you can't bill it as that, but it's one of the things you've got to be thinking about. You've got to stay updated, and if you haven't updated, you need to update and convert to what's happening and staying constant and current with the situation. If you don't, it's an easy way to get left behind, and that's how businesses close. The other thing that a business can do is, you saw Covington go and do the emergency rent subsidy program. Businesses have the same option. They can go to their landlord or they can go to their bank and say, hey, can we restructure my lease or mortgage because of what's happening, the economic uncertainties, the COVID pandemic, the murder hornets keeping me closed, whatever it is, and saying, here's what I can afford. Just go with them to an offer. Don't let them dictate. Go to them with an offer. Write down, here's what I'm bringing in sort of a month now. Here's where my payments are. Can we meet in the middle? Can we take some of the burden off this? Because the vast majority of communities in the United States do not have a Covington, Kentucky program. So the landlords have mortgages they have to pay. That's why they have people in their business buildings that pay their mortgage, but it just doesn't work. And the banks, for those that buy, want them to pay too. I talked to a banker a couple of weeks ago, and they're not loaning money out for the most part to new commercial ventures or even existing commercial ventures, because they're worried that 6 months from now, we could have another economic collapse like we did in 2008. And they're going to hold all of this commercial property that got foreclosed on. So it's in their best interest to try to restructure as well, because if not, they can end up holding all of these downtown buildings. And we know that banks traditionally don't go in and fix them up and try to resell or re-rent. They just leave them empty until someone's willing to buy. They don't have the manpower or the ability, the mindset to do what a Main Street director would do, which is to try to rehab and get it revitalized and filled back up again. So it's important that you talk to your businesses about trying to negotiate a better lease or a better mortgage payment with either their landlord or bank. And that's something that a role that the Main Street director can play. And we'll talk about the Main Street side of it in a few minutes, but keep that in mind, because that's something, a role you can play to try to help. You can talk to the business about what they can afford, what they can do, and then help them by going with them to their landlord or bank and sort of being that neutral third party that can help them. So those are some of the ways that we bring people up into the 21st century. The next thing is experimentation. We talked about a little bit with Capital Books, but one of the others I want to talk about is a coffee shop in Annapolis, Iowa called Grounds and Goodies. They were a traditional coffee shop. They were open Tuesday through Saturday, 6 to 2, 6 to 4, kind of depended on the day and when school was open or not. But they did morning stuff. They had a lunch menu, and then they closed. And it was just one of the dining options that wasn't open of an evening. And it was closed on Sunday and Monday, like a lot of establishments are. Well, then they got grounded. They were told that everything closed. Restaurants closed, bars closed, gyms closed, a whole bunch of things closed due to COVID. And so obviously they didn't have the space to distance anyway. But then when it came down to it, they also realized that they didn't have a better approach, because you could sell coffee online, people could still come by, but in a downtown, they didn't have the drive-up situation that a lot of people were looking for now. So McDonald's and Starbucks, all of those tended to step into that gap. So what Grounds and Goodies did was a different option. Instead of trying to compete with drive-up coffee or drive-through establishments, what they did is start offering dinner. Because a lot of people wanted to support local, they weren't getting out to the stores. So what did they do? They ate out a lot, or they were encouraged to eat out a lot. They started doing nightly meals, and they would package them up, and you could either come get them, or they would bring them to you. They started a dinner delivery service. And in the first month of this, the coffee shop lady told me that she did better in 1 week doing night dinners than she did generally on a good day in a good year, a whole month of income. That people were just excited to have another option. And her goal was, once everything sort of opened back up, was to continue it. Maybe not every day, but pick a couple of nights a week where she had the most bang for her buck and continue to do it. So she experimented and she got lucky, and it showed that there's other options out there. People are dying for other options for food, because this town only had a couple that you could take advantage of, and a couple of them were duplicates. Well, what kind of pizza do you want tonight? Do you want this pizza, that pizza? So they made sure that they had other options, and it gave her a boost that she might not have had. She wouldn't have taken the chance any other way, but she chose to experiment at a time when she could least afford it, but it paid off big. Like I said, the time to innovate is now. Be creative, throw that spaghetti at the wall and see what happens. And then finally, we get to the transparency here. And the COVID surcharges is what I want to talk about. I don't know if a lot of them have filtered down to the US or not, but this story happens to come from Canada. And small businesses realize that reopening amid the pandemic, they're going to have a lot of different things, whether it's masks, face shields, timing people out so you can't have as many in, half capacity, whatever it is. They were trying to figure out, well, how do we recoup funds that we spent on new sanitation, physical distancing measures, some of those plexiglass dividers at tables or whatnot to keep people safe. And so a lot of people just started charging it and didn't tell anyone. Well, a place in Toronto got in trouble for it. It was a hair salon that did it. They started tacking on just this extra amount. It was down there with the taxes and everything, but it didn't say anything. But what another community did was they tacked on a COVID surcharge. And they said, COVID surcharge. There were signs all over the place on the door that said, due to the coronavirus pandemic, we are adding X amount of dollars to this service because we need help pay for some of that, and traditional services don't cover it. And so the fact that the one business was transparent and credible about it and the other one wasn't just showed how much people want to be told the truth. The business that took the time to put it on the receipt, put up the signs, talk to people about it, their business stayed steady or even increased some, or the other one went down. When you don't feel like you can trust a business, or you start getting charges and you don't know what they're for, they're not upfront about them, it's hard to go back to that business. especially in times of crisis like these when people are already feeling the strain of everything, then to feel like they were tricked or lied to on top of it can really be detrimental. So make sure that if your communities or businesses are looking at something like a COVID surcharge, make sure that they are being transparent and open and honest about it and about why you're doing it. And so you need to communicate these changes to customers as early and as often as possible. Going back to Facebook and social media and signs, all the different ways you can touch your potential or current customers, do so. And like I said, a lot of this revolves around mask mandates because COVID is sort of our current crisis, even though it plays into other things happening. So mask mandates is one of the other things I want to touch on, because a lot of different states and municipalities have different ways of interpreting or utilizing mask mandates. I know in Iowa, the governors refused to do one, but some of the individual counties and or cities wanted to do one, and she overruled them and said no, that they could get in trouble for doing it. So now they're battling each other. A lot of local jurisdictions have done it anyway. We've had a lot of local cases spike in a handful of counties. They're allowed to do a mask mandate where others aren't. So there's a lot of confusing rules and stuff out there on mask mandates, especially. Make sure that everyone's on board. If your community chooses something, make sure the city's on board. Make sure the businesses are on board. Make sure your organizations are on board. Try to make it as clear as possible. The transparency here is probably the biggest key. Here's why we're doing it. Here's why we want you to do it. Here's how we'll enforce it. Open and honest up front. McAlester, Oklahoma is the example I like to use, sort of a counter to that, is that they instituted a local mask mandate. And they were very clear about, any business, anytime you're out and about in a group or whatever, you have to wear a mask. If not, you'll be fined. Okay, they were very clear about it. They were very transparent. One of the things they did, though, they didn't sort of listen to the local temperature of what people wanted to see in a mask mandate. They charged the businesses with enforcing it. So if someone came into my XYZ store and they didn't have a mask, I, as the business owner, had to go and encourage them to put one on. And if not, I had to remove them, get them out of my store, because I could be fined for them not wearing a mask. And it led to a lot of, those undercover sting operations where someone sneaks in just to see if they get told or whatnot. And so it caused a little bit of a business disaster. So from a business perspective, when anything comes up that might impact you positively or negatively, be transparent about what's happening and why. And if it's something you feel is a negative impact, talk to your city council members, talk to your Main Street organization, make sure that you three are working together. You're sort of this triumvirate of groups that can work together to really make change easy to help crisis-proof your downtown. Barney's Bakery is the other example I like to use. This is from, I believe, Saginaw, Michigan. And this guy decided he was done. After 35 years, he was done. He didn't want to be part of the bakery anymore. He wanted to close it down. And a lot of people went online and said, oh, hey, Barney's Bakery is closing because of COVID. And he typed up this and put it out on his Facebook, put it up on the wall of his bakery while it was still open and said, that's not it. I'm just tired. I've worked 35 years, all day, every day, long hours, and I don't want to do it anymore. I'm tired. It's not COVID. It's not the economy. It's none of those things. I'm just tired. He was very transparent about it. He was very clear, and he made sure to tell people why. Now, he didn't have to do that. He could have just closed. He could have let people talk about it. He could have even encouraged that, COVID or finances. But he was very transparent and honest, and that allowed him to check out his own way. It's not something that continues to be a problem. People are aware, what? Sometimes you get tired. You just need a break. And that's what's happening here. And so keep that in mind as a business or when you're talking to businesses. The more transparent you are, the more clear you are, the what and the why, the better off you're going to be. So we talked about the 21st century updates and conversions, the experimentation, the transparency. One of the other things businesses can do, not only do they not get a lot of it, but I also notice a lot of businesses don't seem to give a lot of gratitude either. And that's not to say that it's not that they're not thankful for their customers and their clientele. It's just a lot of times we're so worried about how do we stay open, how do we pay the bills, what new mandate's going to come down that affects us, what's going to happen when social unrest comes to our town and we have to worry about defending our property and all those things. But make sure you're not forgetting to be grateful to the people that do stand by you and do help keep you open. And Owasso, Michigan did a sort of a receipt program where anytime someone purchased something, they got a receipt from either the chamber or their downtown organization or even the business that talked about ways to be grateful, ways to help local businesses, even if you don't buy something. And so this was great because it cost zero money. They had these 6 items on there, whether it's writing a positive review, engaging with their posts, sign up for their newsletter. All these things cost them absolutely nothing. And it was a way for them to support small business and still get other people to support them as well. So I thought this was a great way to show that, hey, I appreciate you coming in. I know you didn't buy anything. Here's a way that you can still help support small business. Thank you for supporting our local businesses and trying to keep us open. So this was done from a business side, but can also be done from city or the downtown organization side. But I thought this was a great way to get businesses involved in the job of gratitude. So let's talk about Main Street and like downtown association functions and all those different elements. So on the Main Street side, Main Streets can be proactive. They need to focus on upskill and professional development, and they need to focus on involvement. So when I joined the Main Street world over a decade ago, one of the things that they talked about were two things that they talked about that I still utilize to this day, whether it's in economic development, my consulting, whatever I'm doing, I still focus on these two things as the type of community member I want to be. And it falls under sort of the proactive category. One is street time. When I was trained as a new director, they talked about street time. And you have to spend so many hours a week out on the street, in the businesses, meeting the people, talking to the city, talking to whoever's out downtown, being out and being visible. The more you're out on the street, spending time in your community, the better you're going to know it, the better prepared you're going to be to respond when something comes up. Maybe it's something positive, maybe it's something negative, maybe it's a crisis, who knows what it is. But the better you know your community, the more you're out there, the more the businesses see you, the more the city sees you, the more of a partner you become. Main Street directors a lot of times are seen as sort of that tag along, that redheaded stepchild, for lack of a better phrase, but they're not. They're vital to the contribution of any successful downtown, but if they're not contributing in the way they should be, such as being by visible on your street time, you're not going to be as effective. So make sure you're scheduling a couple hours a week where you're walking the downtown, randomly walking into businesses, and not just businesses that might support you financially, all businesses. Make sure that you're using a street time to its fullest advantage. And then the second one deals more with your relationship with the city. And this is, I was told that Main Street directors and organizations help exist to help remove the burden of this from the city. And if you think about it, especially in the downtown, that's a role you play. Whether it's writing grants or talking to business owners or doing events, you sort of create this bubble that no one else really needs to operate in because you operate there. And that removes a level of pressure from the city administrator or the city staff to function that space, that they're the ones that have to focus on that space as well as everything else they've got going on. They don't have to do that. The Main Street director sort of steps into that role and says, hey, what's going on right now? So like the Covington, Kentucky program, I didn't get into as much detail as I could have, but that's something they partner with the Main Street organization on making sure that businesses are aware of it, how they get the application, all that stuff funded. They help play that service role. So really it's a Covington, Kentucky program utilized by the businesses that the Main Street organization sort of helps bring together. You play that bridge between the private and public sectors, but you do that by helping remove burdens so it's easier for both sides to work with you. So those are two things I've always loved that I learned from early on director training in the Main Street program, street time and the removal of burdens. And I don't know if they teach that as much anymore. I know at the national level they don't. Some states still do, and I don't know if New Mexico does. But if not, it's something start thinking about working into the rotation of how you train, whether it's your replacement, your volunteers, your directors at the state level, whatever it is. Those two things are critical to being an exceptional Main Street program, but also being that ally and that go-to resource when we have a crisis situation develop that will impact the downtown. The next one is upskill and professional development. Anytime that there's a crisis and it might require no travel, or that your finances are sort of in limbo, you don't know if you're going to get all the money you need, businesses don't have the money, the city may not have the money to give you, you start cutting things. And the first thing to go is professional development. And I think this is somewhat counterintuitive. If you want people to be good at their job, and especially how to handle crisis, you need to train them in those sorts of things. But when money's tight, the first thing to go is that, but we still do all the other things, whether they bring in money or not. So especially board members or volunteers are listening, something to keep in mind is your staff and your volunteers need that professional development. Even if something as simple as a webinar, they need that ability to go and learn something that they might be able to take and use to help turn their downtown around if it's having an issue dealing with COVID or economic recession or social unrest. The more they hear, the more they learn, the more effective they and you are going to be. So make sure you're not neglecting professional development. On the upskill side, one, definitely upskill yourselves, but be looking for the people that you don't have. And I'm going to probably talk about involvement a little bit here too. These will sort of cloud up a little bit. But do a talent search. One of the things I always hated as a director was everybody expected me to know exactly what to do on any given subject. Now, I've had a lot of jobs in different fields and I've done a lot of things, so I'm sort of a jack of all trades to a degree, but I am not fantastic at some of the things they expected. And so one of the things is graphic design. I can design flyers, I can do some of that stuff. Art really isn't my background. I just don't have the mentality for it. I can picture what I want, but I can't always make it. And so one of the things that I did was I went to a local school. I went to a local community college. I talked to some people at the art gallery and said, do you know someone that would like to do graphic design? Maybe, probably volunteer, but maybe there's some elements to do the paid work. And we got a graphic designer that way. And it was a lady who ran a local restaurant. She did this on the side. She gave us a good rate because she liked what we did. She was in the downtown. She was part of it. And so I would send stuff to her. She would spend an hour mocking it up, take an hour, help remove the burden off me, and then we'd use it. She would get 30, 40 bucks, whatever it was. I don't remember at the time. But that gave her a little extra income. She got to be involved. She got to put her other work out there, and it supported the downtown needs. So make sure you're doing that talent search. And volunteers and board of directors are great at this. You know people the director may not. Bring them in. I lived in a community, and I'm sure New Mexico has a lot of multilingual speakers. I lived in a community that was 20% Hispanic, which if you've ever been to pretty much pure white Iowa, it was unique for a lot of people there. I lived out east in a lot of different places, so it wasn't as unique to me. But a lot of people just weren't for sure how to deal with the Hispanic community. So we brought in a local volunteer who translated a lot of stuff into English or into Spanish, depending on what we needed. And we started bringing the two groups together. They started working on committees together. They started working events together. And that allowed them to not only cross-pollinate and grow your involvement, but it allowed me not to sit there and try to type through Babbel or Duolingo and try to figure out what word or what context or what conjugation I needed for these verbs. Someone else did it, and they did it well, and it was another burden removed off me so I could focus on something else. Make sure that you're using this time to identify talent. You're probably not having as many events. You're probably not doing as much design work, sort of the two sexy sides of the 4 points. Make sure you're doing the talent search. Make sure you're bringing people in. During a crisis, and a crisis like we're in currently, the economic vitality and the organization points are going to come front and center. They're not sexy. They're not fun. Not everybody's geared towards them, but they're going to be the important drivers of future success. And the Main Street organization is the place for those to flow through. So make sure you're ramping up both of those points if you haven't already. And one of the ways you do that is through bringing on talent that can help you. If you're not a talented graphic designer, don't play one on TV. Find someone who is and see how you can work with them. And then the same thing if there's missing links. So one of the things that I'm well known for and that I've done probably for 20 years is grant writing. And it's something that I'm pretty good at. But a lot of communities, they have grants that they have to apply for, but they don't get any training from, say, their local foundation. They may not have traditional grant writing experience, so they don't know how. The state coordinating program may not train on grant writing or give assistance, especially if the grants are through them. So a lot of people have these things they would like to do, but they don't know how to get there. Make sure you're finding out ways to do missing links, whether it's grant writing webinars. Maybe you work with some foundations in the area and say, hey, can you bring in a grant writing seminar or training class for area directors or area nonprofits so we can get better? Find ways to fill the gaps you don't have. Some of it will be done by talent search. Some of it's going to be done by going out and figuring out what you don't have and what you don't know and figuring out a way to get it. That's a function Main Street can play because ultimately it goes into one or more of your points, but it adds a professional development and a value add for your community. If you can say, oh, Main Street can write grants for you. Main Street can do X for you. Make sure that you're getting value added to the community so you can at least plateau, if not increase, your investor base. Because you're going to need those funds at some point. Make sure they're getting value for their money. And value for their money doesn't mean a cling sign in their door saying Investor 2020. It's giving them real value for their money. And that's why you have to see where your weak areas are in things. And then finally, involvement. We talked a little bit about it above, but make sure you're bringing in fringe groups. I was in Missouri several months ago now doing a similar webinar and talking about how to bring in groups. And the downtown was thinking, you know, hey, we've used every group locally. Everybody uses Rotary. Everybody uses Kiwanis. Everybody tries to get the school involved. If you have a hospital, everybody tries to get those involved. Community banks are great to volunteer. But they were starting to realize it was the same people all the time. And some of those people were aging out or choosing other volunteer options. So I always encourage, I call them fringe groups. That makes them sound a little iffy, but they're on the fringe of what you would consider downtown. So in Missouri, there was this group called Missouri Farmers Care. It's an ag advocacy and education organization teaching people how to care for farmland and how to understand ag and what it does. And if you think about it, that's just one step removed from what a farmer's market does. So bring those people in, say, hey, let's work together as a group. Maybe we can evolve it around a farmer's market, which is the example we gave in this case. Missouri farmers work with farmers and ag students and everything to talk about the benefits of ag and education. But let's do it at one of our downtown events, which is the farmers market. They go together, they have this sort of symbiotic idea of how they can work together. Let's make that happen. So just because a group may not be represented in your downtown or doesn't seem like they are, don't forget that they're out there. There are all kinds of ways to bring in groups. You just got to have that mental capacity to say, how does this group play into what we do? And farming in downtown may not seem like they do a lot outside of farmers coming in to buy and leave, but they can. And this example played really well because it opened up some other options. What other groups are out there that maybe we don't think about that do interact with our downtown? So make sure you're considering fringe groups. And then as always, the generational divides. People talk about millennial this, okay, boomer that. Generation X is just kind of out there. Make sure that you're not breaking your downtown that way. And I always loved when I was a director is I would get people signed up to say, hey, I want to do this. And so pairing them with different generations, pairing a millennial with a Generation X or a boomer, whatever you want to call them, pairing people with different backgrounds, different ages, different genders to do things, whether it's a mailing, an event, whatever it is, make sure you're taking advantage of those divides. They can teach each other. They can also learn from each other. So the more they do together, stronger that is, they can build some of those bridges. A lot of times in a community, you don't have sort of these overarching generational divides. It seems to happen online. Somebody comments this and someone responds with, okay, boomer, whatever it is. But in person, that's a lot harder to do. And the more you work together, the harder it is for anybody to say that this is how we see that. So overall rules of thumb, just to sort of wrap it up here, be progressive. Everybody needs to have some form of planning. You cannot always prevent crises. You cannot always crisis-proof your downtowns. But the more you're aware of the freedom you have in a crisis and the more you take advantage of it, the easier it is. So start strategic planning now. Cities usually do comprehensive planning. Businesses have a business plan. Main streets and DDAs should have a strategic plan. Whatever you call it, plan. And plan for the unfortunate. Always plan for something that could crop up again. Let's say we do a 10-year plan. How do we factor in the plague? How do we factor in economic recession? How do we factor in social unrest? Put those in there. Make people talk about solutions or problems that may arise and the solutions that help overcome them. And be creative. Again, you're looking out in the future. Be Miss Cleo it all you want. Well, I see this happening. Let's try this. Put it together. If it pencils out on paper, it looks like it can work. It looks like it's a solution. Put it in there. Be okay with being wrong. You're going to be wrong some. It's going to happen. You need to focus on the fact that, hey, we're planning. We're trying to take control of our destiny. We've got to be as open and realistic, but also as creative as possible. Next, transparency. Actions always speak louder than words. Let them know what you're doing and why. And this is at every level, city, business, and Main Street. Make sure people know. And if it's a coordinated message, make sure you're all getting the same message. Don't let people create their own. Try to draft something that everybody can use, that everybody can understand, that's simple. The keep it simple, stupid moniker is true for a reason. The simpler it is to understand, the easier it is to follow. And then finally, involvement. Communities are symbiotic. They rely on each other. Businesses rely on the city, or city relies on Main Street. Main Street relies on the business. It goes in sort of this symbiotic nature that people rely on each other. The community relies on you. Churches relies on you. School relies on you. All the people that live there rely to some form or another on the different businesses, the city, and the Main Street organizations. They're all important too, but these three areas are sort of the hub of the downtown and what will keep it running. Downtown's the heart of any city. Keep that blood flowing, and you are the three categories that do it: city, businesses, and Main Street organizations. So keep that in mind. When one is threatened, their livelihood is threatened, all are threatened. So by working together, being proactive, being transparent, being progressive, you can do these things. And then always support local. So many people say buy local, and that gives us sort of this commerce idea, but support local. It's like Owasso, Michigan did. We handed this out, follow these. This is a way to support local. It doesn't have to be financial. Support local, and we can continue to survive. And that's what everybody's looking for, especially now. How do we survive this transition time until we hit this new normal, this new stabilization point down the road? So make sure that you're aware of how communities flow together, but also how to support one another. So just some final thoughts before we go today. Main Street is incremental. Crisis is not. We learned for years, it's sort of pounded into our brain from the national level on down. Main Street is incremental. Change takes time. You might have some big wins, but you're going to have a lot of small wins stacked up. So make sure that you know, and when you're planning, crisis is something you react to immediately. Do you have anything in your handbook or your plan that says, how do we react automatically? How do we do this? Because Main Street inherently isn't that way. And this isn't a dig on Main Street or any of the coordinating programs, because they can't be everything to everybody. But that is not their job. They don't think in terms of how a crisis impacts a Main Street. And going forward, they probably won't either. It'll be more of a history lesson. Well, you know, COVID struck in the year 2020, kids, and this is how we handled it. It'll be more of a history lesson, which teaches some things, but overall, it's not going to be crisis prep. It's not going to be crisis resilience. It's not going to be crisis recovery. That's done at the local level, so make sure you're planning for it. And all the work, all the foundation you lay as a Main Street organization to build that incremental development, that incremental success, is going to be that foundation for when a crisis hits. You're going to know how to build from that point on, not be sent all the way back down. So make sure that you can do both in tandem, that you can do the incremental work, but you can respond as needed to a crisis. Because Main Street's incremental, crisis isn't. And then it's time to transition. Always two forks in the road. Which path do we want to take? It goes back to that resilience argument. Do we want to try to go back to what we think normal was? Do we want to go back there, ignore everything that's happened and sort of start over? Or we take the other path to say, you know what? We need to be ready to recover from adversity. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's our plan to get there. You always have a choice of which path to take, but you need to think in terms of the long term, not just the immediate next week or next month or next 6 months. 10 years from now, what we do today is going to play in and going to have an impact on it. And then one of my favorite questions I ask when I do different presentations and webinars and strategic plans are, if not now, when? And if not us, then who? If we don't take the bull by the horns, who's going to do it? Who's going to be out there? The city, the businesses, and the Main Street organizations sort of form this triumvirate that people look up to. People expect to know the answers. And if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And that's going to be a disadvantage to your community, your businesses, your organizations. And it can lead to a retroactive problem that people have to come out of. So 10, 15 years from now, if you're not the director, but you didn't do anything while you were, the next director or next directors are going to have to take care of it. So make sure that you're all working together on it. And one last thing, don't be scared of crisis. These happen. There's nothing you can do to solve them, whether it's a car accident in your personal life or something as worldwide as COVID. Crisis happens whether we want it to or not. The best planning doesn't stop them from happening, but you can help crisis proof. Just like for those of you that have kids, you can baby proof your entire house and they will still find a way to get into something they're not supposed to be into. That's exactly what crisis is. It's the little kid that says, oh, they didn't do X, so I'm just going to do this. And it's perfectly natural to them, but we didn't plan for it. But by planning ahead of time, you can help crisis proof parts of your downtown. Then when a crisis hits, react to it automatically. So don't be scared of crisis, but learn how to use its effects to your advantage and to your community's advantage. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I hope we have some time for questions. I know that went a little long, but if not, I've got my email and my website there. Feel free to contact me at either of those. Otherwise, I don't know if we have time for questions or not.
Oh, no, that'd be great, Derek. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute and chime in.
So it was so perfectly clear, there's no questions. I love that.
Okay. Well,
Actually,
thank
I
you
have
so
a
much.
question. If I could just chant in, you talked about a lot of wonderful little partnerships and lot of wonderful things that happen in downtown. One of the things that we're going through in Farmington is a renovation, and the Arts Council is wanting to be a little more active. What do you say about the nonprofit? I know that we are helping in many ways and lots of ways that we can in creative to help the merchants and economic development and our artists. Do you have any special suggestion that has worked that you've seen besides what you've mentioned?
One of the things I saw, not necessarily from a rehab standpoint, although it played into it, was that a lot of the local arts communities started taking over doing things like murals on businesses. So that required the brick to be cleaned up and then the ability to paint on it or put it in the studs and then paint on a piece of paper. A lot of them are doing statues and such like that. So a lot of artists got involved, which in turn brought more focus to the Arts Council and what they do and allowed them to be a partner at the table saying, hey, we have skill sets in our ranks like a woodworker. Maybe we can do some local woodworking to keep the project going, to keep it local, and then they can help on these different projects because not every contractor has the crew that they did to come in and do rehabs. So that was one of the things that I've saw in a couple of different communities where it came from where instead of going out for the talent search, the talent sort of came up, bubbled up from the ground, and here's what we do, and then they sort of worked through until they got to the peak where they were considered a partner at the table as well. Sort of the same process Main Street's had to go through in its time of existence to try to validate its existence. But that was one of the things I saw on that. Another one I saw was that a lot of local cities, if they didn't do something like Covington did, that they suddenly came up with grant programs to help with renovation. That way they could keep construction workers local, they could keep contractor crews coming in, staying in the hotels. So again, that symbiotic relationship allowing people to build off one or the other. So those are two sort of areas I've seen. I can try to be more specific, but those are probably some easy generic ideas that don't really pin it to a certain generic location. Are there others?
Derek, this is Ria. I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank you for, great ideas and inspirations. And, I think there's a lot of food for thought and definitely a lot of follow-up research to be done at this point. So thank you.
Thank you. Like I said, if people don't have questions now, they can always contact me too, and I'm happy to answer questions as well. Or if the state collects a whole bunch of questions from people after they think about it, let me know and I can send back the answers as well.
Oh, great. Thanks, Derek. And would you also be able to send us your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
And I'll send along the application for the Covington, Kentucky one as well, just as an attachment.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.